Imagine living your entire life without getting out of bed, not by choice, not by laziness, but by irreversible paralysis. Now, think about what that means. Despair? Revolt? For many, perhaps, but for Alexandrina de Balasar, it was a mission, and not just any mission. She transformed her pain into the purest love, into a total surrender that defied all human logic. While the world seeks comfort, she chose sacrifice. While so many run away from suffering, she embraced it, and all of this for a greater purpose. But what was that purpose? And more importantly, what can this story teach to those who, today, feel that life has imposed too heavy a burden on them? Maybe you've never heard of her. Maybe her story seems far from your reality. But what if I told you that the essence of Alexandrina's life carries a secret that can change the way you face your challenges? She was not just a woman who suffered. She was someone who knew how to transform pain into redemption, suffering into hope. And that is something we can all learn from. After all, who has never found themselves in a situation where everything seemed lost? The difference between those who sink and those who rise is in the way they choose to react. And Alexandrina has left a clear path for those who want to transform their lives. But before you understand how this is possible, you need to know her story. And when you do, you will realize that her story is not only inspiring, it is a calling to see suffering with new eyes, to find a greater purpose where before there was only pain, and perhaps to discover that what seems like an end can actually be a beginning. From the earliest years of her life, Alexandrina de Balasar demonstrated a unique sensitivity to the divine. Born in 1904 in a small village in Portugal, she grew up surrounded by an atmosphere of faith that shaped her life. Her deeply Christian family taught her from an early age the importance of prayer and devotion. Unlike other children who ran to the field without a care in the world, Alexandrina sought a connection with God, finding joy in moments of spiritual retreat. This inclination towards faith did not go unnoticed, and she soon became a reference in her community for the purity and intensity of her prayers. The school in Povoa de Varzim was an important milestone in her education. There, she not only learned to read and write, but also strengthened her understanding of Christian teachings. Her encounter with the Eucharist and confirmation was transformative, consolidating her perception that her life should be totally dedicated to God. While other children saw catechism as an obligation, Alexandrina absorbed each teaching as a personal revelation. It was as if within her there was already an unshakable conviction about her mission, even without fully understanding what the future held for her. But Alexandrina's childhood was not marked only by serene moments of spirituality. From an early age, her fragile health and the challenges of life in the countryside demanded from her an extraordinary resilience. Even when faced with difficulties, she never complained or showed discouragement. On the contrary, her faith seemed to grow in the face of trials. Little did she know that, before long, she would face an event that would change her life forever, demanding a sacrifice that few would be willing to accept. What began as sporadic pain soon became irreversible. At the age of 21, Alexandrina received a sentence that would change her life forever. She would never walk again. The world, which she had previously known through her own steps, would now be seen from her bed. For anyone, this would be a cause for despair, a dead end. But for her, it was a calling. If her body was trapped, her soul would become freer than ever. Where many saw an end, she saw a greater purpose, a mission that transcended the pain. The days were long, and the nights even longer. Immobility could have been a prison, but it became an altar of silent sacrifice. Alexandrina decided that her suffering would not be in vain. She offered every pain, every tear, for the conversion of sinners. And it was not just a pretty idea, it was a real, daily, intense dedication. Many would seek healing and relief, but her? She accepted her condition as part of a divine plan. She did not seek escape, but to transform her pain into love. How many people, when faced with trial, can see beyond the suffering? And so, lying in her bed, Alexandrina became an invisible warrior. Her movements were few, but her influence grew. People came from far away to listen to her, to ask for advice, to understand how someone who had lost everything could offer so much. What no one imagined was that her journey would not end there. Something supernatural was beginning to happen, something that would defy logic and show that her mission was only just beginning. Then something extraordinary began to happen. Every Friday between 1938 and 1942, Alexandrina relived the Passion of Christ so intensely that her own body responded to the suffering. Her humble and simple room became the scene of something that science could not explain. Witnesses reported that, even without the strength to move, she performed gestures that reproduced Christ's torments. She felt as if carrying an invisible cross, moaned in pain, as if each lash struck him anew. It was something impressive, disconcerting. Whoever saw it came away transformed. And it didn't stop there. The hunger that anyone would feel after hours without eating simply disappeared. For years, her only food was the Eucharist. No meal, no sip of water. Only the body of Christ sustained her. The doctors were perplexed. How could anyone survive like that? But for her, it wasn't a matter of survival. It was a sign. God was keeping her alive for a greater purpose. This prolonged fast was not her choice, but a testimony of the supernatural acting in her body. How can she explain it? How can she deny what was before the eyes of so many? As time went by, her fame grew, attracting curious people, scholars, and devotees. Some came out of disbelief, others out of faith, but everyone left impacted. The small town of Balasar was never the same again. Alexandrina, bedridden, unable to leave her room, reached souls all over the world. But there was spiritual guidance guiding all of this. She was not alone. Someone was guiding her on this extraordinary path. Someone who would help her understand that everything she was experiencing was part of a much greater plan. In the midst of so many trials, one thing was certain. Alexandrina needed guidance. And that's when Father Mariano Pino, a Jesuit with great spiritual discernment, came along. He was the first to guide her, helping her understand that all that suffering had a purpose. He encouraged her to write about her experiences, and, more than that, took her message beyond the walls of her room. But what few know is that his influence was so great that, through him, something great would happen in the church. Then came Father Umberto Pasquale, a Salesian who became her confessor and spiritual director. He documented her ecstasies, her miraculous fasts, and all the supernatural experiences she had. But not only that, he was a key player in making the world recognize what was happening in Balasar. He publicized her messages, highlighted Alexandrina's requests, and showed that there was something there that could not be ignored. It was through this precise guidance that her testimony reached the ears of influential figures within the church. And the impact was enormous. Directly influenced by Alexandrina's pleas, Pope Pius XII, in 1942, consecrated the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, a gigantic feat that transcended all expectations. A bedridden, physically limited woman managed to move the church toward an act of global reach. This was no accident. It was a divine plan and execution. But despite so much recognition, her journey was approaching its end. And, as always, she already knew what was coming. Alexandrina always knew that her mission on earth had a set time. In the last days of her life, she spoke with unshakable certainty about her departure. It was not fear, it was not doubt, it was a serene conviction. On October 13, 1955, she uttered her last words, "I am going to heaven." And just like that, like someone who simply walks through a door, she left. But her legacy was only beginning. After her death, Alexandrina's story was not restricted to Little Balasar. On the contrary, it spread, crossed borders, and began to impact lives around the world. Testimonies of healings and conversions began to emerge, and her name began to be associated with a profound and transformative spirituality. Official recognition by the church was only a matter of time. After all, the signs of her holiness were too evident to be ignored. In 2004, almost 50 years after her death, Alexandrina was beatified by Pope John Paul II, a historic moment that placed his name among those whom the church recognizes as examples of faith and absolute surrender to God. But his influence did not end there. To this day, his life continues to be a source of inspiration for those who seek to live with purpose, with surrender, and with the certainty that every suffering can be transformed into something great. But there is something that few realize. His example is not just to be admired. It is an invitation to something much greater. Now that you know the story of Alexandrina de Balasar, stop and think. How have you dealt with your challenges? When life puts you against a wall, do you rebel or do you turn it into something bigger? Alexandrina could have spent her days lamenting her condition, but she chose a different path. What about you? Are you living on autopilot or seeing a purpose even in difficulties? This story is not just about faith or suffering. It is about finding meaning where many only see pain. Maybe it is time for you to start seeing your own life with different eyes. The big question is, what do you do with the pain you carry? Do you use it as an excuse to give up or as fuel to grow? Alexandrina shows us that no matter how big the problem, There's always a way to transform into something bigger. But that decision is yours. And if her story touched you in some way, maybe it is time to change the way you face your own challenges. What can you start doing today to find greater meaning in your journey? If the story inspired you, then don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because there is much more to learn and reflect on. Life is too short to live without purpose. And if Alexandrina has taught us anything, it is that even in suffering there's a call to something great. Are you ready to answer it?